Did you know that every day, on average, 2,000 pupils have been excluded from school, and 40 which are permanent? This week saw the much-delayed publication of the Timson report looking into said exclusions. One of the report's key recommendations is that schools maintain some accountability for the pupils they have permanently excluded, and I couldn't agree more. Whilst nobody wants a kid creating carnage in the classroom, the solution can't simply be to kick them out of the whole education process, especially not if the reason is just to protect a school's results in the league tables. All kids learn differently, and most troubled kids have reasons to be that way, which, given care, support and guidance, can often soon be ironed out. Joined-up accountability needs to take place between the schools and the councils to ensure that exclusion from school doesn't mean exclusion from education.
Well, Michelle, for a second time today, I'm going to say I entirely agree with you. And I'm so glad you raised this topic. I debated it over the weekend on my LBC show, and actually I called it a racket. The notion of headmasters offloading children with either learning difficulties or other challenges, and that could range from poverty and hunger or sleep deprivation because they're sleeping in the same bedroom as toddlers and babies because they're crammed into a small house, so they don't get a good night's sleep. They turn up at class and they fall asleep. The teacher may think they're lazy when actually they're just unable to sleep at home. And you know, hunger is another one where they come in hungry, so they're unable to concentrate. Pupil poverty. So a practice has developed, as the government report rightfully identified, of offloading, which is a headmaster excluding these challenged pupils from the school just to maintain a certain level in the league tables. I think what you're doing there is you're for essentially business reasons.
Offloading. Sorry, it is an offload, but it's known as offloading. You're absolutely right.
I think what you're doing there is for business reasons, you are basically permanently affecting the future education and therefore career prospects of a vulnerable young child. And they are often children, 13-year-olds, 14-year-olds. And then, of course, what happens once they're off-rolled is they get sent to the PRUs, the pupil referral units. And at the PRUs, that's where gangs are waiting at the gates, preying on these vulnerable school kids, knowing that when they go to these PRUs, they don't know anybody inside. They're often scared because they're quite violent places, they can be, PRUs. And so the gangs then offer them protection and then get them involved in drugs, gangs and dealing. And that's it. The future of that child is gone.
It's not just formal exclusions, which are a huge problem, but what the data probably doesn't capture is informal exclusions. You know, I've reported on so many cases where a teacher will say, your child can only come in 3 hours a week, and there are ways of getting around the system that doesn't get recorded as an exclusion.
How do they do that?
They say, we can't cope with your child. They can come in twice a week for one lesson. And there are so many parents who, and the part of the story we haven't really talked about is how many of these children who are being off-rolled have special educational needs, and children of colour. It's shocking. The only way I would kind of dispute your angle, Majid, is that I do think head teachers need to be held accountable, but for me this is much more of a systemic issue. If you look at the pressure that's been put on schools, especially academies, academisation has increased these market pressures on schools. They are under relentless pressure to prove results. They feel they cannot afford to have disruptive children or children who are lower performing academically, and they are therefore resorting to these completely unethical methods of hiding these children from the system. But
so
I don't think this is a question just of heads not being good people. This is a question of the system that has created this pressure on schools.
What are you going to do with naughty boys in school?
This isn't just about
No, but what are you going to do with naughty boys in school?
You would expect a teacher to want to get to the root of why a child is misbehaving.
They're just naughty.
Well, a lot of these children have learning difficulties.
What, you're not going to exclude anyone?
I'm not saying don't exclude anyone, but I'm saying when you have the majority of children being excluded, having diagnosable special educational needs that can be treated, given time, care and teacher attention.
So surely the 40% leap is something to look at.
Of course it is, of course. There's way too many. And as you quite right, off-rolling is a hideous practice, and there probably is an argument to make sure that these children's education is then reflected in the league tables. But let's say there's a class of 32 and 30 or 31 children aren't getting educated because one is just being continually naughty, no educational needs, you've got to kick him out.
That's not really.
No, but that's not.
Why not?
That's not really what we're talking about. And I used to be that naughty kid, and I was constantly kicked out of class. But we're not really talking about that. We're talking about.
You're telling me all these 7,720 are all people who have special needs and whatever.
No, I'm not saying that.
I said all.
Majority of people in prison, as we know, are people that, as children, had special needs. We know that the literacy levels are incredibly low.
What about the 30 kids who want to be educated?
That's not the point.
Well,
the point
for 30
is,
parents it is, or 30 mums or dads.
The point is back to Afwa's point, we're not doing enough to equip the schools with the tools they need to actually be able to help these children.
I want those 30
and we know
kids to
that
get...
PRUs are a pipeline to prison, so they're not working.
And
so we
also,
need to look at what we do that will work.
I would say that a 13-year-old, because the sort of thing you get excluded for, or at least in my day, would be if you have a fight with a teacher, right? But a 13-year-old having a fist fight with a teacher, I'd say that by definition they have certain challenges and problems, either at home or mental health or something, because it's not normal for a 13-year-old to throw fists at a teacher.
And that kid can be kicked out of school, right?
Right. Well, I'm saying we have to look at what the problem is
boy
first.
assaults his teacher. You agree with me? He's kicked out of school.
Depending on what's
Yeah, but
going
what the
on.
hell?
Because, for example, there are other options. For example, you have special needs classes within the same school, right? So it depends on what the problem is. If that 13-year-old is subsequently found, surely you'd agree with me here, if they're subsequently found to be beaten up by their father every night, then there are certain other measures that can be taken first before sending them back into the arms of that abusive father.
So a grown man or woman goes to school thinking that the 13-year-old might hit him or her again? That's okay?
No, Nick, my point in this is I'm not saying don't ever exclude a kid ever again. That's not what I'm suggesting. So if I've got a kid in a classroom and is battering his teacher, of course you shouldn't just be sat, oh yeah, carry on, keep going. I'm not suggesting that for a second. That would make me an idiot. What I'm suggesting is that being excluded from the school shouldn't then mean that they just drop kicked over there and forgotten about.
It's the PRU.
Yeah, and this is my
unit.
point. So what I'm saying is, because we have this obsession, and parents in some ways are to blame for this, because they are obsessed when choosing a school for their child. What are the results of this school? So we have this society that's obsessed with the academic output of a school. We've got schools, therefore, that won't even risk having those affected by some kid that's messing around. And that's what's driving all of this, the obsession with academic output of schools.
And can I just add to that? And also, because at the moment, if a school off-rolls this child, then that failing child doesn't have an impact on their results. Whereas what Michelle is saying is, if that failing child's, if that failure performance still has an impact, then the school is going to actually want to do something to help that child.
But the breakdown is the PRU. It's the pupil referral unit. That's where the emphasis.
We know that, but the schools could be doing more before we get to the
frustrating about this debate, Nick, in particular, your angle, is that this isn't mysterious. There are professionals who know exactly how to help children who are disrupted in class. You talk to educational psychologists. They know exactly what to do. Do they have the resources? Are class sizes such that there is the space or the time to... And that's, if you talk to head teachers who are doing this off-rolling, talk to them off the record. They will tell you, we could help this child if we didn't have a chronic staff shortage, one educational psychologist who comes in for 1 hour a week, cuts to social services, cuts to child and adolescent mental health services. The whole system is breaking down, and it's these vulnerable children who pay the price. And I don't think it's fair for the other 30 children in the class to have their education disrupted.
Absolutely.
I'm saying that school is also the place where you should be able to help the child that is struggling, not PRU, not prison, and excluding them is just a way of trying to disappear the problem. And it's our responsibility as a society to include these children in the mainstream, and if we're not doing it, we are failing as a society.
And let's not make it so easy for the schools to exclude them.
Yeah, but with all this happy-clappy bull bleep, will you just accept some kids are naughty?
We accept that.
And need to be biffed out?
But I would say the majority...
Why are they naughty?
The majority
Do you not think there's a reason
safe.
for the naughty behaviour?
Sorry, second.
Is there a reason, usually, behind naughty behaviour, in your view, for children? Is there
they've not connected with the lessons, or they just like being the class clown, or whatever it might be. And in some cases, they've got real problems. Yeah, they might be dyslexic and dyspraxic. Then they need help.
You wouldn't usually exclude someone for just being a class clown, though, would you?
No, it depends how far the clowning goes.
Nick, you always talk about the power of good teachers.
Yes.
So therefore, we know the right teacher can save any child. And that's
I
what
don't
we
know
need
about
to look
any
at.
child.
Most children.
Most, yeah.
Again, most, I would say.
Anyway.